What feeling does this scene evoke for you? I couldn't find the words myself when I first watched it, but once I finished this movie, I understood what the emotion was and how the entire film creates this sort of internal tension as you're viewing it. This is not your normal thriller. It's closer to horror, but not even in a typical sense there either. This is a one-of-a-kind film that I think will stick with me forever, and if you watch it, I'm sure you'll feel the same exact way. This has to be the most unsettling experience put to cinema that I think I've seen ever. Maybe not the most, but it's up there for sure. No. This film is a completely different type of disruptive experience, and I couldn't recommend it more for anyone out there who is a lover of the thriller or the horror genre. And this is why I think it's so important to pay attention to foreign cinema, because there are a number of nearly perfect films to stumble into that are right there on the other side of some subtitles, as Bong Joon-ho would say. And this isn't his film, but this is one of the best films you could watch, bar none. This is Cure. Before we jump into the deep dive, what's up everybody? Mars Hogan here, back again with another video on the channel. It's been a minute, been a busy start to 2025. Sorry to anyone who's missed me, but yo, Editor Mars here. When I tell y'all this video kicked my bro, it has been such a hassle trying to get this edit done. I think I just kind of like messed up my workflow in some kind of way, and my computer was just running really slow. Like trying to scrub through the footage was taking forever, but I got it done. And I must say, I don't like to toot my own horn, but I think the video is really good. So please try to stick along with it until the end. And again, I'm very sorry that it took so long to get this out, but hopefully you enjoy it. And hopefully I don't have this happen again. But thank y'all, appreciate y'all, just wanted to check in. I am back, ready to get into a really great film with you guys watching out there. Thank you so much to everyone still tuning in, still supporting the channel in any way. It does not go unnoticed, and I appreciate you all so much for being here. And if you're new here, welcome. I am a something cinema guy who talks everything film, television, entertainment, and whatever in between. If you're not already, subscribe to the channel if this content is your jam. And if at the end of the video you had a good time watching, please like it and comment any thoughts you have, because I love to hear from the people. Thank you for watching in advance, and I hope everyone enjoys the video. So let's talk about Cure and the fear of identity. I think it's safe to say this is Kiyoshi Kurosawa's masterpiece. His direction here could spur an entire college course just on this movie alone. Being that it's a foreign film, it may be considered a cult classic on this side of the world, but I think it is an extremely special type of film that should be regarded as a masterclass on filmmaking anywhere. Released in 1997, Cure follows the story of Detective Takabe, who is trying to solve the case of a series of murders that have the same MO but different perpetrators. And essentially, we come to understand that there is one mastermind behind the whole thing, with an immensely peculiar method to the madness that he creates. This film to me is a cornerstone of Japanese horror. It's a profound exploration of human psychology, sociological decay, and the darkness of imagination. Like I said earlier, it falls in a very weird space between genres. It's a thriller by storyline, but horror by atmosphere. Cure embeds terror in silence and stillness. At the core of it, this is what makes it so unique. The internal challenges of our characters, the societal malaise that is experienced from the tension in this story, it's all symbolized and reflected frame by frame throughout the film. Be warned, spoiler territory is incoming. Cure starts very conventionally. A murder happens, a detective comes in to try to solve it. And on the face, this is what it is in its entirety. Under the surface, however, lies a more sinister narrative. The first murder has a specific MO, an X sliced into the neck of the victim. And what follows is a number of murders that have this same exact X carved into the neck of each victim. this would still be kind of a regular detective story, but the thing is, they caught the killer in the first murder right after it happened, and each murder after that was committed by a different person. And it begs the huge question, how is this possible? And this is our first diversion from traditional tropes of this narrative. We get introduced to the real culprit almost immediately in this movie. It happens about 10 minutes into this 2-hour film, which is very odd. Even though we really don't know it yet, it quickly becomes clear that this character has an important influence on what's happening in this story. And what makes him and these murders so eerie is that not only are they all committed by different people, none of them can recollect their actions. And what we learn is the cause opens up a disturbing can of worms, that culprit being hypnosis. Mamiya is who we're introduced to as the antagonist of this film. When we first encounter him, he's wandering this empty beach, staring up at the sky, and nothing's really happening, but it just feels weird. And I think it's the space and the quiet. And in watching it, we really don't understand what this is yet, but we have an eerie feeling because it comes right off the last scene, which was the photos of the first murder. And then we're introduced to this very somewhat random scene, or at least random on the surface. I also think it's interesting how we first get an empty beach and there is an overcast that comes and kind of engulfs the space in darkness. Another man is there as well, and when he talks to Mamiya, we quickly learn that Mamiya has short-term memory loss. However, the theory with this is that it's all just an act. Let me explain. So the man wants to help Mamiya, thinking he's got a condition, so he takes him to his house. And Mamiya's actions are very weird, but also very particular and calculated when you really dig into it. He's staying in these very dark spaces, repositioning himself, messing with items, and he keeps repeating himself, repeating phrases, and just having an overall repetitive conversation. And it's off-putting up until we get to this particular moment where he flicks his lighter. Immediately, there is a shift in tone, and it's an extremely distinct indication. Everything goes out except for that single flicker, and the frame goes still. The eye light that we see in the man's face as he looks at the flame is haunting, to say the least. It's like he's being taken over, and we realize soon that he is. And even more disturbing is how he speaks to him right before this occurs. It's almost as if he knows that he's got him. I don't remember anything. You do. He's responding to a question about the man's wife, whom he ultimately had the man kill in the same X fashion as the other murders, and that the man ultimately will not remember anything of afterwards. It's very ironic, the subtlest of commands that I kind of missed the first time I watched. The whole sequence is extremely deliberate, and it lends to this idea that Mamiya isn't at all someone who has memory loss himself. The execution of his tactic in retrospect feels way more mesmerizing and intentional as you understand the scene. He repeatedly does these things that catch you off guard, and over the 7 minutes from his introduction to when we finally leave him on screen, it's almost like we're lulled to sleep by something that we don't quite realize is happening. There are just these cues, these movements through space, these changes in lights, and of course the circular nature of a conversation that's happening with someone who claims to have memory loss. It's questions that are repeated again and again, and answers all the same. At some point in this scene, you kind of tune out of it, much like how the person probably tunes it out as just being a quirk that Mamiya has. And that is how this idea attacks you on so many levels. This is how we get to why the X is important as a profound symbol of what Mamiya is doing and what the whole movie is questioning. The people who do the killing lose themselves under Mamiya's spell. Their identities erased, much in the way that they X out the lives of the victims that Mamiya has them kill. They talk about this in an essay on the Criterion Collection, how this is an individual erasure and also an indication of foreclosure of collective action. Now, what does that second part mean in the scheme of this film? That hinges the conversation into this idea of society, of isolation and community. because the general understanding of hypnotism is that you can't force someone to do something that is completely unimaginable to them. If someone at their core doesn't believe that ghosts are real, you can't hypnotize them into seeing this figment of an imagination that they don't innately possess. It's like turning a light on in a room with no switch to begin with. What this indicates is extremely sinister. There had to be that feeling, that inkling of intention, however small, in each and every person that he hypnotized. And this gets darker as we go through the movie, but it's already scary to begin with. If anyone can become a victim, what does that say about us? Think about it for the second murder and for the murder of the cop. The man killed his wife and the officer killed his partner, whom he seemed to have a good relationship with. I assume that they probably coexisted as partners for a long time. And I think it's important to note that these connections were overturned and mutated into something that neither of them probably thought capable. And it's less to me that they had an inkling of killing these specific people. I don't think it's that Mamiya is bringing out exactly. I think it's broader, more of an inkling of disregard for human life as a whole, so to speak. I think it's just him saying that that push can happen to anybody because we all have it buried deep inside us somewhere. There had to be a switch. And that is why I think the lighter flicker is used as our indicator that the trance was successful. All Mamiya does is peel back the curtain. All he does is illuminate the desires and frustrations of who he comes into contact with. And I think that's the intention behind how he appears, like a ghost on screen. He's hollow, a shell of a man, kind of drowsy, aloof. He's disconnected with prolonged silences and stillnesses surrounding him. He's a void, and he embodies a certain distinct fear of emptiness and exploitation of the loss of self. And this is why characters completely unravel down to nothing after coming into contact with him. And it's interesting because the first victim after we meet Mamiya, we see him lose his sanity completely in the very oddly open doctor's office. Again, with the space thing, the emptiness. The second victim, the cop, we see him become almost childlike in his mental acuity. He even sinks down to the ground into this dark corner of the frame in his scene while being questioned, lost in a sort of shadow, if you will. And the third victim, the doctor that Mamiya hypnotizes, we see her killing and then nothing of her afterwards. We get less and less of each victim until we see nothing at all. And that may be a stretch, but I thought it was odd, so I'm saying it anyway. We're not sure how the effects of his hypnosis linger exactly, but what it feels like is that they kind of clean a person's slate and overwrites it with Mamiya's ideas. And when he's gone, there's just nothing. They're just a vessel, and really all they're left with is their heinous act. Both these characters and the audience are forced to confront the discomfort of this emptiness. That's why we sit in so much stillness, in so much quiet, in so much space all throughout this film. It's imposed upon us to experience how deeply empty this film is, this world is, and how vastly empty we as people can become, much like Mamiya, much like the punishment he inflicts on others. Now, we've talked a lot about Mamiya thus far, and rightfully so, but his story doesn't play out without Takabe, our detective protagonist. I find it interesting how, even though he's on the opposite side of what Mamiya is doing, there is so much aligned within his life to the same kind of emptiness that Mamiya produces. His wife, Fumi, seems to have some sort of degenerative condition, actual amnesia and disassociation that makes her do things unnecessarily and makes her forget actions that she's taken. The film actually opens with her reading a book, one that she knows but ultimately forgets reading mere moments later. This book is important, and we'll get to that later. But Fumi represents a strain on Takabe. He clearly cares for her, loves her, but her condition causes her to be a difficult partner for him. And there is constant repetition in his life because of her, in the same way that Mamiya infuses repetition as part of his hypnosis. The washing machine in their house is a scene we revisit a number of times throughout the film, and it serves as a sort of marker for where things are with Takabe. The first time is early in the film when we're really first getting introduced to him and his relationship with Fumi. He comes in the house, the washing machine is running, and he shuts it off. It's not until later that we realize he does this habitually, and it's a pattern in her brain that she can't break, thinking that she hasn't already done the laundry. It's such a small task, but it's such a reality for people who deal with these conditions, and it's profoundly important to the narrative here in this film. The second time comes after Takabe meets Mamiya for the first time, and it is important for different reasons. One, Fumi is not home. She has gone out and gotten lost because she was getting things for a trip that Takabe said they would take earlier in the film. Takabe is tender, but it's clear that this causes him turmoil. And I mean, obviously it would. And he blames himself too. It's small, but she was out there trying to help him, so he feels responsible. And I think this minor interaction gives us insight into his overall feeling of responsibility for Fumi as a whole, and thusly her burden on him because of her condition. And I viewed this interaction, along with it following Takabe's meeting with Mamiya, as a connected occasion that sort of serves as a turning point for the film and for Takabe's life, and for how him and Mamiya ultimately intersect. Takabe's first interaction with Mamiya is the same as all his others with his victims. Repetition, silence, stillness, like the trance is being performed. And then there's this moment when Takabe questions what's in Mamiya's head, and Mamiya sits down in front of him and puts his finger to Takabe's forehead and questions, "Here." Takabe, however, doesn't break focus on the current situation, on the fact that he is interrogating Mamiya in connection with the murders before him. So in that moment, it feels like he hasn't fallen victim to Mamiya's ability. And I'm sure a lot of people noticed this and felt how I felt, that maybe he was immune. But the thing here is, what if I got that moment completely wrong? And as we go, it begins to feel more and more like that's exactly what happened. The movie does this really cool, subtle thing to me where it kind of changes its attachment to reality as we progress the film through the lens of what Takabe experiences. And I love it because as we go more and more deeper into the story, we kind of lose touch with what's real and what's not. And the central question is, at what moment can we not trust what we're experiencing on screen? Now, while I do think that what happened with Takabe and Fumi, with her getting lost and him going to find her, did actually occur in the film, I think it's more of a highlight of what we're getting into for the rest of the story. It's a red flag of sorts that kind of leads us into the loss of reality that eventually happens in the film, that eventually happens for Takabe. Immediately after this, Takabe goes on a search for where Mamiya came from and finds where he was living. And although it could mean absolutely nothing, I find it odd that the owner of the space said that Mamiya paid a year of rent in advance, and that's why he hadn't seen or interacted with him at all recently. It didn't make very much sense to me that he would be able to do that, or why that's at all a part of his character, and we don't really get much answers to this. We find out that he was a psychology student, and then not much else about him, but what kind of student could afford to do a year of rent? Like I said, this could easily be nothing and just a part of the story, but with so much mystery surrounding Mamiya, it begs the question of if this is how we first really and truly divert from reality, and if that story is even real at all. And what we see in his space, his books on psychotherapy, his writings on animal magnetism, and then what we can assume is a dead monkey based off the other monkeys running around the property, it just all feels oddly too aligned, oddly too perfect. The feeling I got was that Takabe was walking into a setup. For me, upon rewatching, I think the surface was crumbling. The cracks in reality were forming, the cracks in Takabe's psyche. And why this became really significant is because it directly precedes the scene that clearly expresses his psychological break when he comes home to Fumi and imagines her hanging from the ceiling. It was shocking the first time because it felt like this wasn't a part of the movie before, this surreal aspect. But when I look back at those other scenes, it felt more of like we were being pulled into that madness that Takabe was, slowly but surely. But it's almost like the film doesn't want us to believe what is happening. Like when Takabe goes and interacts with Mamiya again after the scene. He asks him how he hypnotizes people, and even though he sees the flame, he still seems completely lucid. But there are so many cues that Mamiya does, and for me it just can't be random. The sort of positioning he takes as he's in the space, the messing with the objects again. He tosses this can that makes a loud, distinctive sound. Like, why would he do that? And Takabe doesn't really pause or seem shaken. He's again acting completely fine. But is this just distracting us from what's really happening? Like, can we really trust that Takabe is okay? Why I think he isn't is because we're in this very distinct space, and the conversation that gets carried out from Mamiya's prompting is very telling. The space is distinct because for almost the entire time we don't have a single cut. For about 10 minutes we live in this dark hospital-like room with this really weird kind of like offshoot cave looking box thing in it. I don't know, it's hard to describe, you can see it here, but anyways, we again have a drawn out scene with a camera that just lives in a space for a long time, and I think that's significant in commuting our focus towards the conversation, towards the words, because they're mainly talking about Takabe's wife after Mamiya asks him about picturing her hanging, even though he had no reason to know that that just happened. He hasn't met her as far as we know, but yet he knows everything about Takabe's struggles with her. He said he got it from another officer, and we later realized Takabe's partner is also hypnotized, but I don't think it's just that, because Mamiya hammers home this questioning of Takabe's identity, asking him who he really is. Is he a husband? Is he a detective? And Mamiya ultimately tells Takabe there is no real him. And this makes Takabe sort of snap after this, and he starts to kind of spill the beans about how he feels about his wife and his life, like a confession, like this is therapy, or even more so, like he's finally admitting it to himself. In a way, it's like Mamiya is becoming just a vehicle for Takabe's own dialogue about what he's dealing with. It felt like an inner monologue, which I think is important if we're questioning reality here, because what if he is the reason that Mamiya knows about everything? And this is playing out as a precursor to what occurs later in the film with Takabe and his wife, and we'll get there, I promise. And what happens visually was noticeably important to me, because he walks into the box that's in the room, and it's him isolating himself in a way. I felt like it was boxing him in, closing a sort of perspective for himself. Oddly enough, it was like a gotcha, like he'd been captured by Mamiya, is what I felt from the visual. And what is interesting is when he steps out of the box, at first, he's merely a silhouette of himself, a figure without detail. I love this scene a lot and felt like there was so much little subtle detail here that had a lot of implication on what all this narrative is doing. This film is like being strangled, having something be snuffed out as the grip of it tightens. That's how it devolves into a surreality, if that's the word, whatever. But that's how Takabe's actual life is, which is what makes his wife such an important cog in all of this. She represents his burden, his routine, his repetition. The first scene with the washing machine is exactly the same as the second. Takes his jacket off, turns it off, and goes to the table. I think it's funny also that we have this washing machine as such a central tenet of his home life, juxtaposed with the fact that he also repeatedly went to the dry cleaners for his own clothes. And I was thinking, like, is that a part of his life that was brought out of his wife's consistent turning on of the washing machine, and a part of her condition that he wants to try to avoid maybe? And there's not an answer to that, but it's just a thought that I had that I thought was peculiar. When we get to the last scene with the washing machine, it's an important distinction here. Takabe is visibly frustrated, angered even, and the scene is actually shot different for the first time. We're following him instead of using the same wide from the previous times, and it adds extra attention to the details that evoke the emotional response from him, like when he throws the uncooked steak. This is the indication of that tension of his existence that carries forward the dark actions that follow in the film. This is the representation of him being suffocated by his personal responsibilities and ultimately having enough of it. And we get this really weird, like, going on a trip motif that's just like abrupt and odd and looks funny. And I still don't quite get it as a choice, like visually, but it felt very distinct and was very distinct, especially given what happens. Okay. I feel like I've been alluding to it a lot because I didn't want to jump forward, but I'm just gonna say it. The implication at the end of the film is that Takabe kills his wife, that Mamiya hypnotized Takabe to kill his wife. We don't know this for sure, but that's the implication. And it's shown so quickly and abruptly that it almost gets lost in the ether. And this is what I think we've been building to from that first tap on the head by Mamiya for Takabe, to his wife getting lost, to him finding more hypnotic motifs, to his outburst in the hospital, to his utter disgust at the washing machine. All of it. When you get to the end of this, you inevitably feel like, how did we get here? But it was all there, hidden in plain sight. And it's amazing to me how the film does it in such a distinct nature. Like, after the weird trip motif, Takabe shoves his wife off into a mental hospital under the guise that he just has to finish his case and then they'll go on their trip. But let's circle back to the last washing machine scene. At the very end, we see a quick cut to him grabbing a knife, and we leave it like very abruptly to that same trip motif. I think nothing of it at first because of how jarring and weird the next scene is. You just kind of keep on going and get thrown off. But when you look back and you're living in this context of real versus surreal, what do we honestly think happened here? Or like what played out in Takabe's head? Were these murderous predilections, or did something actually happen and we're further thrown off the path of what's real from here? Being open to interpretation is a real strength for this film, and it really leans into what it's questioning about identity, about choice, about self, and about discovery. All these things can take form in vastly different truths through interpretation, like in real life. And I think the film creates these illusions and dives into the surreal to allow this narrative to take on an expansive journey from what it actually reveals to us. Because truth be told, I could take this thing damn near frame by frame and discuss each and every moment as part of what this is largely trying to connect for us. I could probably make a whole series just about Cure. That's how information dense this film is when you're really examining it and trying to gather that deeper meaning. There's one last thing that was revealing to me that I wanted to discuss. Remember earlier when I mentioned how the film starts with Fumi and a book she's reading? So that book is Bluebeard, and I think it's like a German folk tale, but essentially it's about the young wife of this nobleman whose curiosity nearly gets her killed. See, Bluebeard had forbidden her to enter a certain chamber, but she felt she had to know what was in there, and what she found altered her completely. What the chamber held was the dead bodies of Bluebeard's previous wives. Why this story is so important to the film is because of what Takabe is ultimately searching for. He's the young wife, curious to look into the chamber, unable to resist his search for understanding of Mamiya, and ultimately to confirm him as the culprit and know why and how he did what he did. And what this understanding ultimately gets him is what we see at the end of the film. A somewhat disjointed course of things. There's another trip motif, just with Takabe this time, as he searches for the escaped Mamiya. He wanders into this factory and he finds him, and Takabe appears extremely exhausted. Mamiya says it was fate that Takabe came there, and that he was trying to find himself, and then Takabe shoots him. He asks Mamiya if he remembers, and Mamiya shakes his head yes, before marking an X on Takabe, and Takabe subsequently shoots him again, multiple times, killing him. And this to me sort of locks in the final aspect of Mamiya's hypnosis. The next scene here is Takabe walking through this wet office, like there's water on the floor, and with water being a symbol of transformation like in everything, I thought it fitting that this would be the case. And he hears a message on a homophone, a repetitive and oddly poetic message, and we see him in his most entranced state yet. Much like the young wife loses her innocence, Takabe loses everything. His wife, who is shown dead with an X on her throat immediately afterwards, he loses his innocence, his identity, and all for nothing. Or maybe he never had an identity to begin with, like Mamiya told him. Maybe that's why this all happened. Maybe he had the same void that Mamiya had. And as the Joker would say, all it took was a little push. and the ending leaves us with as haunting a message as ever. As we see Takabe sitting in a diner, he interacts with the waitress, and the very last moment, after what I guess is her manager says something to her, this same waitress grabs a knife and walks towards someone, and that is how the film ends. The cycle begins again. In Cure, Kiyoshi Kurosawa doesn't just tell a story, he crafts an experience that immerses us in the fear of our truest selves and the daunting unknown that comes with that. The film's journey from realism to surrealism mirrors our own fears of losing control, losing identity, and the thin veneer that separates order from chaos. By confronting us with the unsettling quiet and the eerie calm, Cure forces us to face the disquiet within ourselves and our society. It's a cinematic exploration of the darkness that's potentially within us all. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Cure. Honestly, this is definitely a good reason for you all out there to give foreign cinema a chance, but it was really just an excuse for me to talk about why I love this movie so much. It's such an amazing film that I think is so narratively layered in a way that is extremely rich. I loved it, and I recommend it to anyone who wants to have a deeper connection with something that they're watching. This is the perfect film for that sort of exploration. Now, if you found this analysis thought-provoking, interesting, or you just enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share your interpretations. Until next time, I'm Mars Hogan, and I appreciate you tuning into my channel. Peace.